And then I started to realize, wow, these acupuncture points actually might be stimulating something that's substantial, physical, and tangible. It may not only be a esoteric, energetic, intangible notion that I was taught at school.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Neurological. I've been thinking about simplicity, and for a while now, as my life is often full of tangled complications, and yet there are these moments when there is a simple sense of clarity, of falling into a sense of knowing what actually matters, and I wonder at how it is that simplicity can hold such a deep sense of completeness. Simplicity is not about lacking. It's about having entirely enough and without complication. I recently had an email conversation with a Neurological listener, and she had this to say. I was lucky to be raised by a Depression-era grandmother who insisted that I learn to drink coffee without milk and sugar because, well, you never know. We washed out Ziploc bags and always mended socks, even when we could buy a pack of 20 for $5 at Costco. We learned to garden, take walks when we were mad or sad, drink chicken soup when we were sick, and listen to classical music on the radio while we baked cookies on Sunday afternoons. Those experiences honed a skill in me to have the ability to find happiness in the darkest of corners. I had a Depression-era grandpa myself. He rarely went to the hardware store. Not that he was unwilling to spend money. He was, on cars, on travel, good cigars. But when it came to nuts, bolts, latches, cotter pins, he had a habit of keeping and sorting and storing. Recycling was not something you did for the environment. It was simply a part of a life of attentiveness to small matters. Counter to what our media-driven world is trying to sell us, happiness and contentment rarely come from buying a product or a service. It hardly ever comes from outside. More often, it's a kind of internal recalibration. You won't find it in an app on your so-called smart device. It's not something that comes in a pill or a smoothie form, and it's not on a clickbait list of things you need to start doing right now. More often, cultivation of simplicity comes from reattuning our nervous system to the slow undulations of nature, allowing ourselves into the pace and tempo of life outside the ideas that float through our minds. It's more about abiding than striving, inhabiting rather than chalking up a streak on your lifestyle app. I'm not suggesting, or at least I don't think I'm suggesting, a nostalgic return to an imagined bucolic time. I suspect, and this comes from clinical experience, that most of us live in a time frame constructed of should and comparison. And so we miss the sustenance that comes from the natural pace of one heart connecting to another. My patients usually want to heal faster than the pace of nature, and I want to accomplish more than what realistically can be allotted in 8 hours. I don't know if this is a uniquely modern malaise, but I bump up against it all the time. My mind moves at the speed of my cell phone, but my body, and more importantly my spirit, those inhabit a slower timeline. And it's the slower tempo that gives me glimpses into the simplicity that allows for having enough and without complication. For you neurology geeks, I've got a conversation coming right up with Poney Chiang. You're going to get a clear-eyed view on his perspective on how acupuncture points relate to the nervous system. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Neurological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AcuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
It's fun to see how modern science so often collaborates what acupuncturists have been saying for centuries. All right, friends, let's get into some geeky neurology in Chinese medicine. Poney Chiang, welcome to Neurological.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm so happy to have you here. I ran into you a few years ago. You were in St. Louis for the Medical Acupuncture Association. You were sharing your amazing dissection information and neurology and acupuncture points, and it was mind-blowing. So I'm so happy to have this opportunity to get deeper into it with you.
Yeah, it's awesome. I remember meeting you too, and it's funny how we have common acquaintances and friends, and it's really only 1 degree of separation away.
You know, the Chinese medicine world it's actually very narrow. You're right. It's like 1 at the most 2 degrees of separation. That's just the way it is. So neurology, I'm curious to know how you got into neurology, because when I look at your website, I see that you've spent a lot of time studying herbs. You did an apprenticeship in Taiwan. You spent time studying Kampo in Japan. So you've got this big herbal background. I'm kind of curious about that. I want to dip into it at some point in our conversation. I'm wondering how you got from herbal medicine to slicing bodies apart?
Well, obviously you've been doing your background searches, okay? So I feel a little nervous. You're like the CIA, okay? But
Oh, I'm not as good as the CIA. All I do is look at people's websites. I mean, think about it, right? If a patient refers somebody to you, that person is still going to go look at your website,
correct.
Right?
So
Of course.
yes, when I decided to study Chinese medicine, my whole intent and my passion was focused on herbal medicine. It's just one of those things. Maybe I was exposed to certain Chinese cinema, and that affected the way I perceive Chinese medicine. Might be a little bit different because I was born in Taiwan and didn't come to the West until I was 10 years old. So a lot of that early imprinting had already happened at that age. So unlike my North American practitioner counterparts that might have been exposed to Chinese medicine primarily through acupuncture, because that was what was very different in the West compared to conventional medicine. For me, my exposure to Chinese medicine was herbal medicine. I saw, even in movies like The Curse of the Golden Flower, a Hollywood version of a Chinese martial art movie, there are scenes where the doctor would take the pulse and prescribe some herbs and things like that. So for me, very early on, like my impression of what a Chinese medicine physician is actually a herbalist. So I actually had no interest in acupuncture. So I like to make the joke and say that, had I had Pacific College of Oriental Medicine, where I attended my master's degree, offer purely a herbal program, because as you know, most schools either offer just acupuncture or acupuncture plus OM. There was not a stream where you could just take OM.
And you were just doing OM. You were just studying herbs at that time.
No, what I'm saying is, like, had there been a school that offered only OM, I would probably be the only student.
You would have been there.
But there isn't that option. So I took acupuncture almost because I had to. There was no other choice. Okay, so I was like the reluctant acupuncturist. That just goes to show how strange and, I guess, harmonious life is, that I would now embark on a totally acupuncture route, and that's kind of like what I'm starting to become a little bit more well known for, is the acupuncture instead of the herbalist. I spent a lot of time studying herbal medicine. My primary interest was treating dermatological problems, and I had studied with Mazen Akafagi, and then I went to Shanghai to do internship at the Shuguang Hospital, where I shadowed the chief of TCM dermatology there for a couple of months. My whole heart and soul was herbal medicine. And in fact, in Canada, from Toronto, Canada, where I am, our profession is a little bit more behind compared to the U.S. And it's interesting kind of how East Coast is always a bit slower than the West Coast. So if you think in terms of the history of the legislation, in the West and in the U.S. it's the same thing. In Canada, the same thing. Ontario is about 15 years behind British Columbia. It's kind of interesting how that works out. So the reason why I'm talking about all this is because I was kind of considering myself a little fortunate, having studied in the U.S. In a way, I was a little bit more ahead in terms of my understanding of the maturation of the profession in North America, at least. As a Canadian, I got to see what it was like, what the Americans are doing. And as a student, I was exposed to the idea of lab testing organic Chinese herbs that a lot of practitioners in China don't even know about, but certainly very few practitioners in Canada know about that. But because I went to school at Pacific College, we had collaborations with suppliers that supply herbs of that quality. Because I'm a herbalist at heart, I wanted to offer that to my fellow practitioners. Well, first of all, I use lab testing organic herbs as much as I can. And then, but if I was going to go through the trouble of importing all that, I might as well offer it to other people, other practitioners here. So that's a little bit of kind of a side of what I also do on the herbal side. So it's kind of a big segue, but coming back to the acupuncture side now. So I went to school to study TCM style of acupuncture. You know how this whole notion, whether people agree or disagree, that TCM acupuncture is a bit more herbalized approach to acupuncture. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard that claim before. And
yeah, it's one of the common criticisms. People have lots of criticisms about TCM, but that's one of the criticisms. Yeah, so I'm super curious to hear your point of view.
Well, see, because I had a herbalist mindset going into Chinese medicine, for me, my bias, for whatever it's worth, is that I would approach the internal problem with herbal medicine. So for me, acupuncture was not my go-to for internal problems. Not that acupuncture cannot treat that. It just, I already know how to treat that with herbal medicine. I was going to go, learn something else to totally replace it. I could learn it as a complement to it, right? So for me,
you've already got something that works and it works well. Why go add something else?
Exactly. So for me with acupuncture, I wanted to do something that I couldn't do very well with herbal medicine. And for me, that was a nice balance. Because my training was primarily TCM based, up until the time I had just graduated, I've gone on to do some more classical herbal stuff. I wasn't very prepared, I felt, to treat pain and, range of motion issues with acupuncture. Maybe because my heart wasn't there, okay?
Well, actually, I don't think so. Because I hear a lot of people say, I got out of school, I've got these ideas, but when I go to actually do it, it doesn't seem to work that well.
Yeah, I mean, let's say somebody has a crackly sound in their knee, right? And you might think that, okay, that's liver blood deficiency, not nourishing the sinews, right? So it's not incorrect for you to needle liver 8 and, spleen 6, tonify yin, tonify blood. Maybe throw your stomach 36 in there because it combines both spleen 6 to tonify blood and to try to treat the underlying reasons for it. But, even herbal medicine takes time to restore that liver blood. So I think acupuncture takes at least just the same, if not more.
We can only heal as quickly as the speed of physiology.
Yes. Yeah. Whether it's TCM physiology or Western medicine physiology, right?
Physiology is physiology.
Exactly. So I definitely felt that I was underprepared. I was very well prepared to be an internist, but I was underprepared to be able to offer pain relief and what I call physical medicine or external medicine. I needed to educate myself and improve myself. So that's why I started to take some courses in manual therapy, physiotherapy, that type of courses. And I even enrolled in a few more quote-unquote Western approaches to acupuncture, such as shrine needling type of courses, which is, I want to clarify, is because that term is a little bit confusing sometimes. But what I'm referring to is Travail's trigger point, manufactured trigger point releasing approach to acupuncture. And then I also was very lucky being from Toronto. We actually have a couple of very well-known biomedical acupuncturists in the Toronto area. And I was able to study with people. I was indirectly influenced by Dr. Joseph Wong, who's the author of Neuroanatomical Acupuncture. And one of his more successful students, Dr. Alejandro Loriega from McMaster University. So these people help introduce me directly or indirectly to more of a neuroanatomical worldview to acupuncture. And Dr. Joseph Wong has passed away in 2017, but he was an MD physiatrist, but also studied Chinese medicine in China. So it really brought a sort of integrative approach.
Very much what you were looking for.
Like
this is like the perfect guy for you to study with.
And it's right here in Toronto, right? So
in your backyard.
Yeah. So I was just looking for ways to improve my understanding into the acupuncture. Why? Because even though like I said, I wasn't totally passionate about acupuncture at that time, but after I helped my patient with herbal medicine, they would ask me, I have this pain, can you help me? Do you also do acupuncture? They also just because I did dermatology, they will also assume that I only did dermatology. Do you also treat, digestive problems? Do you also treat pain problems? And I got to realize that, hey, the general public, whether they're Eastern background or Western background, kind of have this expectation that if you're a TCM practitioner, you have to know how to do acupuncture. And
right. And if you're an acupuncturist, you should know how to treat pain because acupuncture is so famous for treating
exactly.
pain.
And, as I mentioned, I didn't feel very well prepared. I was applying the stuff that I had learned, which is a more of a TCM internalist or herbalist approach, and wasn't really getting the results. So that's why I got into this neurological area. And then how did this then lead to all this continuing education? Now I'm getting myself out to my years in. So
you're kind of fated when you're a doctor, Chinese medicine doctor in particular, that you're probably going to be studying your entire life.
Yeah, and I'm a professional nerd, so this is it's the ideal profession for me. Just always studying all the time.
It's perfect, right? Oh, I get to study my whole life. Lucky me.
Yeah, it is lifelong learning. I was inspired by the work, by the learning I had gotten from Dr. Loriega and the work done by Dr. Joseph Wong. And then I started to realize, wow, these acupuncture points actually might be stimulating something that's substantial, physical, and tangible. It may not only be a esoteric, energetic, intangible notion that I was taught at school. Because what are the chances that these acupuncture points just happen to be at exactly very important nerve trunk and branches? It could be a coincidence, but it would be like you just throw a dart at a dartboard with your eyes closed and somehow landing in the bullseye. Okay? It could be possible, but very improbable.
What was it that first clued you in that acupuncture points were at these very significant junctures of nerves?
Well, it was started all by the work of Dr. Joseph Wong. He had already characterized a few of the important nerve trunks that the acupuncture points have been located, have been transmitted and passed down. All I've done is simply sort of filling the blanks. So once I realized that, this is probably not a coincidence, let's take a look and just from head to toe, complete all this work. Call me a little bit of obsessive compulsive personality.
Good thing to have in a doctor.
Okay. So I just systematically went through every single point, pulled out the anatomy books that was available. And I quickly realized that not a lot of these anatomy textbooks, first of all, they're very, very old now. They're not really accurate in terms of surgical accuracy because the illustrator's objective is not the same as acupuncture's objective, and even not even close to the surgeon's perspective. I mean, first of all, this is a two-dimensional media on print that you have to try to communicate a three-dimensional idea. What if there are some structures that are behind one another? You couldn't show that, right? Unless you have like a transparency leaflet that you can peel off to see that what's behind there. You cannot appreciate depth. So what I've noticed is that a lot of illustrators, quote-unquote, cheat. They will laterally or medially displace a structure that's deep to some other structure in order to expose it so it's visible on paper.
So you can see it, but it might be actually much deeper than superficial. You wouldn't catch. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard of acupuncture channels. I've heard of people talk about the meridians themselves, that some like the liver, they go way deeper than something like the stomach, right? Or you've got like the spleen and the liver, and they run a very similar trajectory, but I've heard people talk about one being like the liver is deeper than the spleen, that kind of an idea. So that makes sense to you. Yeah.
And I started to realize I couldn't put all my eggs in one basket with your typical anatomy textbooks. So then that led to, okay, let's go to PubMed and actually pull up. Fortunately, because I have a prior doctoral level research background, I'm very experienced with pulling up journals and accessing them and searching for them.
And you're a geek, so of course you love PubMed.
Yeah. Yeah. I was able to pull up primary source papers, and a lot of these papers were papers published by surgeons. Surgeons were trying to avoid accidentally cutting nerves. So they had a real vested interest because of malpractice lawsuit purposes. They would dissect a whole bunch of cadavers, oftentimes in the range of like 20 cadavers or so, and then sort of figure out, quote unquote, the average pathway of nerves so that they could avoid them in their operations. And those.
So this is what you're talking about when you say surgical perspective.
Yes.
That being very different from the illustrators or even just basic learning anatomy.
Correct.
These guys really want to know where stuff is in a three-dimensional world.
Exactly. And if you look at the textbooks, a lot of times they don't focus on the cutaneous nerves so much. There's a bit more emphasis on like the motor nerves. But the surgeons, when they cut, they have to worry about everything. So even where they cut in the skin could accidentally transect a cutaneous nerve, then that would cause numbness, tingling, or even pain. So they usually want to figure out where is the best place to cut. So I found those papers very, very useful for me to actually get correct nerve path information so that I can then try to align them with acupuncture points. But then, so it doesn't answer your question about why I got into dissection myself, okay? The reason...
Oh, I can see how you got into dissection. You're going deep, no pun intended, but deep into the anatomy, where things are. You're researching things that surgeons are talking about. But because you want to know this stuff for yourself, you need to get into bodies and see where it is yourself.
Yes. First of all, the anatomy textbooks wasn't cutting it. No pun intended. The surgical sources were great, but surgeons were not interested in acupuncture points, right? So it was still a lot of interpretation, and there are certain regions in the body that are not commonly operated on, but there are acupuncture points there. So then there was a need for me to actually step up to the actual surgical precision level and do it myself to fill in the rest of the gaps I couldn't, and also just to confirm some of the original interpretation based on just stuff on paper, right? So you need to confirm it in a real specimen and then fill in the gaps for which the literature has gaps. So that's what got me into that area. Again, since I was gonna do this and I've been teaching this a little bit, and it certainly informed my practice. It changed the way I needle. It changed the way I think about what I should be targeting when I needle. And not just that, what is the dosage response? If you stimulate a point that happens to a sensory nerve, then there's a paresthesia you can reproduce. So imagine, we've all had the experience of being needled in spleen 9 and getting that zing down the legs. Well, that's the correct dosage sensation for spleen 9. What about all the other ones? So that would differ depending on what nerves are in that location or what muscles are in that location. So I was able to systematically characterize proper dosage sensation associated with each acupuncture point.
Each point. This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code Neurological for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Now, you say it changed your practice. What did it change it from, and what did it change it into? How did it shift things for you? Because it sounds dramatic. What happened for you?
Well, first of all, I got more interested in acupuncture and became actively promoting myself and advertising myself with doing more acupuncture. And the funny thing is that I have designed my clinic to be more of a herbalist clinic. I was fortunate to be able to design a space from scratch. Like it had no walls, I could just design it by myself. And the front part of my clinic was a dispensary. Like you walk in, it looks like a herbal shop. That was like my
because it is an herbal shop.
Yeah, it is. And because I didn't have an acupuncturist mindset, I didn't partition my clinic into a bunch of little acupuncture rooms that would be very feasible for a high volume acupuncture practice. So I quickly ran into a wall because I had other associates in the clinic. We were running out of rooms. That was a problem I didn't expect. So
it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Though.
So advice.
Too busy, need more space.
Advice for people that are like just graduating: don't think that you're always going to be specializing in the thing that you think you're passionate about. Okay, make room for the possibility that you might expand your interest. So I started treating more pain problems, and because I now have this peripheral nerve outlook to acupuncture points, I naturally became more interested about how I can treat problems that wasn't just myofascial, but perhaps nerve related, like nerve entrapment, for example, or take it to the next level, the connection between the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system, how I can then now treat or think about ways how I can treat central nervous system problems. And also in school, we learn about scalp acupuncture and things like that. How can I combine what I've done with the peripheral nervous system with the scalp acupuncture central approach to create a more balanced or more holistic approach to treating patients with stroke that are recovering from stroke sequelae, Parkinson, and so on and so forth. So my practice has now sort of grown into a second specialization, even though in Canada we're not supposed to use that term, specialization, into the neurological sphere.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about this, in particular, dealing with nerve entrapment. I mean, this is something that usually people go to a surgeon to have a nerve released.
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear about your take on this with treating this with acupuncture.
Yeah, I do feel this is definitely something that is not something you hear a lot of a practitioner talk about, or definitely not that, as far as I know, not too many continuing education providers teach this kind of information. And in my typical promotional phrasing for the entrapment workshop that I teach is exactly like you said. Usually people think this is a surgical solution. Let me just give you a few brief examples. Why don't we talk about carpal tunnel syndrome, because it's so well known, right? So your carpal tunnel has, within a tunnel, 10 different entities. Okay, there's a tendon for flexor pollicis longus, 4 tendons from flexor digitorum superficialis, 4 tendons from flexor digitorum profundus, so that's 9 so far, plus the median nerve itself. So 10 structures within this tunnel. The tunnel gets blamed for this problem, okay? So the surgical intervention is to release the roof of this tunnel so that the diameter of the tunnel could be expanded in a way so that the nerve, that's only one of the 9 things in there, will no longer be irritated. But how does an acupuncture, so how do I approach this? I work on not the nerve, okay, or the roof, because the roof is a ligament or fascia that our needles cannot really do too much to cut, okay? I try to change the contents of the tunnel so that there is not adhesion and the tenosynovitis of the tendon sheath of those tendons inside the tunnel. So how do I do that? You don't actually need to needle the tendons themselves, okay? I don't think they respond too well to acupuncture. You would needle the muscle bellies, which is a lot more proximal. So think in terms of points, let's say like lung 6, for example, okay? The points that are more proximal, points like in the neighborhood of heart 3, for example. These points are more proximal. These are where the muscle bellies of those muscles I mentioned earlier that contributes to the tunnel. When you lengthen those muscles in the tunnel, you will reduce the friction of the tendons that are rubbing against each other or the walls of the tunnel, causing tenosynovitis.
There's not as much restriction on those tendons. They can relax and create more room in the tunnel.
So I'm not changing the walls of the tunnel. I'm simply freeing up the movements of the content and reducing friction that could potentially cause inflammation and then irritation of the nerve there. Even though I say I'm interested in treating nerves, but nerves always exist in the environment of myofascia. We can affect the myofascia to then indirectly affect the nerve. And then, if necessary, so that is sort of like the root cause that for carpal tunnel as one possible example, that the tenosynovitis was irritating the nerve. So we treat the root reason for that. But once I find that once the nerve is irritated, it doesn't just magically de-irritate itself. It tends to be stubborn and stay that way. And so there is reason to needle pericardium 6, pericardium 7, and provide light electrical stimulation to do what I call de-irritate, to clean up that nerve area. And then some symptoms will improve immediately. But if you don't address the tenosynovitis or affect the tunnel contents, problems going to come back. So we need to actually look at it from both the root and branch symptom and manifestation perspective.
I mean, this is TCM 101, right? Root and branch.
Exactly. Yeah. And the nice thing about the whole talk about tenosynovitis and the muscle belly, those things line up with the channel sinews. So in a way, it's still traditional, classical Ling Shu chapter 13 about the channel sinew pathways. I attempt to sort of juxtapose the classical theories with the modern dissectional research, and to try to create a, for lack of a better word, more of an integrated, holistic approach to the treatment.
Well, it sounds like you're also using the modern perspectives and our ability to, look more deeply into the body. This is something that the ancient Chinese didn't have, that we do.
That's right.
And by taking that deep gaze into the body, where things are, how things work, knowing something about Western physiology, you can then overlay something from the Ling Shu, for that matter, and begin to see how each of these perspectives informs the other.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I'm also known for is interpreting the classical passages in a neuroanatomical perspective. I definitely have found that there are numerous examples and excerpts from the classical passages that strongly suggest that the channel theory description they have passed down, or the effect of the acupuncture needling sensation that being passed down, could be interpreted as the result of nerves depolarizing, or what I call Duchi sensation.
Okay. Yeah. Nerves depolarizing. I'm not sure what that means.
What that means is that when you get that zing, like a little bit of shooting electrical sensation, that's that nerve firing. In the classic, it used the word called emitting. So obviously they didn't know about electricity, so they wouldn't use that word. You don't use the word we would use today to say, oh, that was an electrical feeling, because that didn't have that electricity, like the way we do. But they use the word called emitting or issuing, which is, we will never truly know what the authors of Ling Shu or the Suan were describing, right? But so all we can hope for is trying to make a little bit of sense of it, and hopefully that can result in some improvements in our clinical practice.
Mm-hmm. I want to stick with depolarizing for just a moment. What is the therapeutic benefit of that occurring?
So I'd like to answer that from both the East and West perspective. First of all, we learn from our mentors that the Duchi sensation is very important, right? In order for the efficacy of the points, whatever the point of that, the function indication of whichever points they are, we have this general accepted notion that you need to get Duchi sensation in order to elicit whatever those function indications are. And Duchi sensation is quite varied. You can have warming sensation. You can have sometimes a propagating shooting sensation, a twitching sensation. When you get that kind of a shooting sensation, then from a traditional Eastern perspective, that would be interpreted as some kind of energy flowing within energetic conduits, such as meridians. So from an Eastern perspective, that might be interpreted as something being unblocked. If you try to reduce the pathology, the pathomechanism in Chinese medicine down to one word, it's basically be stagnation. So it's the cause of, it could lead to heat, would lead to whatever other things, but that's a starting point that leads to various pathomechanisms in Chinese medicine. And so to have that propagating sensation, I imagine to ancient patients, Asian practitioners, that would be the experience of something flowing, which is counter to the notion of blockage. Okay, so that's the needle from the needler's perspective and the therapist's perspective. Now let's talk about the Western medicine perspective. We now know that when we get that depolarization happening, there are neurotransmitters that are involved to make that happen. And at the local tissue level, there are actually releases, there are compounds that are released at the local site of the needling. For example, substance P, which is important for pain attenuation or pain reduction. There are something so CGRP, calcitonin gene-related peptide, or regulated peptide. These agents actually promote local vasodilation. In other words, they actually promote local blood flow. Okay. And
moving blood in
exactly.
Chi. That's a super fundamental idea that we have.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But scientists now also know which nerves are being stimulated when you needle with acupuncture, down to the specific subtype. So apparently, type of nerves called A delta fiber nerves are the ones that our acupuncture needles tend to most stimulate. And we know that nerve as an afferent, meaning it takes information from the outside to the inside, or from the peripheral to the proximal, will bring that information to the spinal segment. So let's say, for example, needling heart 7. That's ulnar nerve territory. So that's like think C8 to T1 level. So that information brings back to C and T1 level in your spine. That information is processed locally at the spinal level and sent back down to both sides of the arm, not just one side. Okay, some of the information goes up to the brain, it's processed, and then sends back down. It can send back down the arm again, or it can send back down to any organs and glands that's also at that segment. So this is how you can have a somatovisceral effect. Basically, it's a relay loop. The information comes into the brain sends it back down to the organ. Because the body's natural homeostatic abilities, or you call it balancing yin and yang, it will do whatever it needs to do to balance that. Sometimes it just needs the reminder that you need to initiate that innate homeostatic or yin yang regulatory mechanism. Now, we know that happens whether you get a depolarization or electrical sensation or not. Okay? But we also know that more of that happens, at least more of that registers with the brain if you were to feel.
If you get the Dutch Chi. But even if you don't get Dutch Chi,
it does happen.
It can still happen. This is so I remember you mentioning this earlier in our conversation about how you're looking at working with the central nervous system through the peripheral nervous system. And of course, the thing that came up for me was, well, golly, isn't that how things way on the periphery would be able to treat things way deep in the viscera? Because if you can get something into the central nervous system, well, the central nervous system is going to take that information and use it internally. They're not disconnected. They're intimately connected.
There's actually, so I want to touch on this, what you mentioned about how when you needle in the peripheral, it'll be more effective for the visceral. Think back to when you took neurology at Orium School, and remember there's something called a homunculus, which is how the sensory and motor cortex is divided in an inverted fashion. The proximal 1/5 is the leg, then the middle 2/5 is the arm, and then the lateral 2/5 is the face. Or that little really weird proportional guy that has like huge hands and big lips,
giant thumb.
Yes, exactly. So think in terms of that, because that's a representation of how dense the innervations are from different parts of the body. Like there's a disproportional amount of inner nerves around the lips, around the hands, and the feet. Step back a little bit and look at distal style acupuncture or 5-element style acupuncture. You have to use points just below the elbows and the knees.
Right, all the antique points.
Those points, there are styles that just do that and can treat everything, right, according to their way of thinking. And that's not very far-fetched, because those are the parts of the nervous system that are going to get the loudest message to the central nervous system. Those are the parts of the peripheral nervous system that will get the most information to the central. Then it's up to the central nervous system to then decide whether I want to send information back down to reduce pain, or to send information into the organs to regulate their glandular or sympathetic, parasympathetic, or yin and yang, however you want to look at it, functions.
We often have this idea that if you go very distal to where a problem is, you get more leverage on it because it's distal. That's a very Chinese medicine way of thinking. I'm overlaying that now with what I'm getting from you in this conversation, which is these areas are much more richly innervated. And so it's a lot easier to get a message into the system because there's a lot more receptors that are listening and are looking to do something with that stimulation.
Yeah, I've been known to say that if your acupuncture does not have distal points, it ain't Chinese acupuncture. Okay. Okay. So that means you're treating locally, right? Obviously, we try to connect meridians, right? So with a proximal point, which is a distal point, that could be on the same meridian. That. So there's our meridian-based reasons for that, but superimposing the idea of the homunculus, that the more distal you go, the stronger, the louder the message. It just shows you why the ancient practitioner probably found that was more efficacious and transmitted this way of treating.
Yeah. I've got a question that's just popped up in my mind here. Now you've got me thinking about neurology in a way that I don't usually think about it. And what I'm thinking about is how in Chinese medicine we've got this idea that there's like the tie-in channels, right? We got the hand tie-in lung, we got the foot tie-in spleen. We say that they're related because they're at the tie-in level. Or we'll talk about things like, okay, we've got the lung and its fu organ is the large intestine. These things are connected. Are you finding correlates within the neurology that like connect some sort of nerve plexus in the foot with a nerve plexus in the hand that you would be able to like call tie-in, or something that's up in the hand that you go, here's large intestine, here's lung, and here's some neurological overlaps that we see? Is any of that showing up?
Not too much. There are a few sprinkles here and there. For example, if you look at the points on the liver, we often say that the liver meridian wraps around the genitals, right? And you look at where going back to the homunculus idea, so like a very important point in the liver channel that as the lower point is has a direct A train access to the genitals. You never use that word together. I never use that word. Those two combination words together. A train and genitals. Okay. Okay.
Well, you just
A-train
did.
To the genitals,
okay,
yeah.
So for some sort of genital issue.
So let's say liver 5, okay, because it's a
five
low point. So let's look at that from the homunculus perspective, right? It's in the foot. The homunculus of the foot is actually right in the midline. So is the genitals, right in the midline. So you can see how maybe that works from a homunculus association. Just like how we have this idea that DO20, treats problems on the other side of the body. Right? So the DO20 treats problems on DO1, right, or REN1 area, and we explain that as the microcosm and orbit connection. But look at where DO20 is located, is smack on the part of the homunculus that is mapped to the legs and genital area. So that there's a lot of, in a way, of course, one would need to really sit down and think through all the points, but it's definitely a few interesting ones there that really shows you that one possible mechanism that these points are indication have been passed down is probably through the homunculus or the way that the peripheral information is then being brought back to the central nervous system.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other points that really stand out to you that demonstrate this principle of the homunculus and the way that the nervous system is set up in our body and how it relates to particular points that have a big influence? I mean, you just mentioned liver 5. Are there some others that seem to have a big bang from this particular perspective that you see showing up in your practice a lot?
Let's take the example of large intestine 4, for example. It's one of the most heavily studied points. Yeah, and it's
the heavy hitter on the A train.
Yes, it is. That point is located in the pathway of the superficial branch of the radial nerve, the superficial branch of the radial nerve, okay, which is corresponding to the brachial plexus. Those are all the nerve segments from C5 to T1 that goes to innervate the upper extremities. When you needle large intestine 4, obviously you'll be stimulating the radial nerve, because the superficial branch is derived from that. But as an afferent, is at this point of the nervous system, that radial nerve is purely just sensory and cutaneous. It does not innerve any muscles anymore. And also look at where it is. It's very distal, right? So proximity to the thumb. You mentioned how the thumb is heavily represented in the homunculus, strongly representing homunculus. So that is a huge, loud message. So from that perspective, you know that point will going to be more bang for your buck, just because it is a big representation of the entire brain, right? And so the louder message goes in, more likely that more louder message can come back down to change your perception of pain and whatnot. So that is from the homunculus perspective. But from a segmental perspective, what that means by the segments in the spine, C5 and T1 is pretty high up on the body, it's in the neck level. Once you create that information going up to the brain, that information doesn't just affect C5 to T1, it affects everything below that as well. It doesn't affect things above it necessarily, okay, but it will affect everything below it. So
and how's that work? How's it that it affects things below but not above?
Let me just finish my train of thought. Train of thought. Okay. Okay. So what happens is the information goes to the brain. Okay, there are centers in the brain, in the midbrain, something called the periaqueductal gray nucleus, that processes the information and will send neurotransmitters down the spine to then further release endorphins, different types of endorphins that ultimately reduces our perception of pain. And so that top down, they call it, or descending attenuation is the medical term, will affect everything down below that. So in a way, LI4 is the painkiller point. It will affect everything down to your foot. It can do that, and that actually makes sense neurophysiologically speaking. Now, what about it doesn't work so well things above it? But wouldn't that be contradicting that LF4 is actually supposed to be a command point for the face, right? The face surely is gotta be it's
above C4,
right?
So above C5, right?
So I don't claim to know everything, but here's what I think is one possibility. Okay, going back to the homunculus again. The middle 2/5, which is upper extremity, but it's actually mostly thumb. Okay, if you look at it. Okay, the thumb is huge. Okay, in the brain. What's the lower 2/5? The lower 2/5 is the face. So the thumb is right beside the face. And we now know that the mapping is not very clean cut. There are overlaps. So there are overlap between the upper extremity and the torso. There are overlap between the upper extremity and the face. So perhaps that's the reason why large intestine 4 is also a command point of the face, because the homunculus of the thumb is so close, right? Adjacent, and overlaps with the face region. Yeah. So it's pretty exciting, right? Like means that
super cool.
They're super cool. That means, hey, that means it's, for me at least, I like to say it's okay to study anatomy. It's not going into the dark side by studying anatomy. Perhaps ancient acuanatomists knew this, passed this information to us, okay? And we have these protocols or these ways of treating pain and treating different problems that are based on the experience, but we may not understanding exactly how that's happening. We know it works, but what if we actually know it works? Then we would be able to understand when it wouldn't work as well, or by understanding how it works, we can now actually create our own empirical new approaches that is still in keeping with traditional teaching, but allows us to see problems perhaps that were not as common in ancient times.
Yes, and I mean, in a way, kind of reverse engineer. Is it reverse engineer or forward engineering? But I want to come back to the thumb for just a second, and then I want to get into the reverse engineering. So we hear about large intestine 4 in school as being this like heavy hitter, strongly moves chi and blood. We're just talking about the homunculus, the big thumb. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way that I'm thinking about this right now is I could do some kind of a treatment because I want to get at something. But then if I want to like supercharge that, if I want to supersize it, so to speak.
Yeah.
If I want to supersize that, I could just do large intestine 4. That is going to totally light up that big part of the brain where the thumb is. And now we've got that much more brain and nerve activity paying attention to what we're doing to the other needles. So it's like lighting an afterburner on the rest of the treatment.
Correct. Yeah, you can certainly layer it that way.
Yeah, you could stack it that way.
Yeah, you can stack.
Okay. All right. Okay. It's great having this neurophysiological way of looking at and thinking about how this stuff works. I mean, I love thinking about it in the classical way, and I love, working in my clinic and seeing what my hands tell me and just, learning from my experience. It's one of the pleasures of being a practitioner is that we get to always learn this way. But being able to stack in this neurophysical anatomy, it's just got me thinking in all kinds of other directions, which brings me back to this thing about reverse engineering, that if we knew our anatomy better, then we might be able to select points or think about treatments based on, okay, I know if I put a needle in a certain place, it's going to light up the nervous system in a particular way, and I can use that along with the other points that I've selected.
Absolutely. So this is why once I realized that, hey, ancient point locations are not a coincidence locating at very precise branches of various nerves. And in fact, every single nerve that can safely be accessed, and I don't just mean like your radial nerve or ulnar nerve, I'm talking about down to minute detail, like the deep motor branch or the medial branch or the superficial branch of the radial nerve. Every single minute little branch, there is one and exactly one acupuncture point bang on those locations. So I know this is just might be the first time some people are hearing about this, and it's hard to, you might intellectually understand it, but at a gut level cannot fully appreciate that. But once I started to appreciate this on the gut level, I realized, wow, that means my job as an acupuncturist is to really balance the nervous system or balance the meridians, however you want to term it. And that made me realize that it's okay. Okay, if ancient acupuncture passed on these points and there's such amazing anatomical specificity, then I better really go and study my anatomy so that I can become a better acupuncturist. That was kind of like a big shift. You were mentioning how I changed my approach. Like, for example, there's no contradicting the classic. Everything is still, I mean, if anything, sometimes the students tell me, I kind of feel like saddened in a way that it's just kind of quote unquote reduced to the anatomical now. Okay, but I tell them, no, far from it. For me, it's like, it's amazing how did the ancient know this? How did they know stuff that there are some branches of nerves that just published 10 years ago, but they knew this at least 2,000 years ago. For me, it makes me more excited about acupuncture. As you know, I was kind of like more of a herbalist to begin with. So it got me excited about acupuncture to know that, wow, what I'm doing is actually both energetic and anatomical, and and that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, they might actually be mutually synergistic.
So at this point, it sounds like you have this, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a three-dimensional synergistic view of nerves and meridians. At this point in the game, this point of your understanding, where where you've been, where you've come from, where you are right now, what would you say the acupuncture meridians are? What are the Jing Law, right? This is a discussion we've had in China, at least in the modern world, about Chinese medicine for a long time. Are the meridians real? Are they not? Are they physical structures? Are they not? There's a lot of conversations about that. At this point in time, what's your sense of what an acupuncture meridian is?
Okay, I hope I don't get into trouble.
No, we're already in trouble.
Yeah. So the train is now derailed. Okay.
The train is now derailed. Okay.
I can only speak from what associations and patterns I've seen based on my research and also limited clinical experience, as I certainly don't have like 50 years of clinical experience. First of all, going back to the classic, Ling Shu, chapter 10 is the title of the chapter is called Jing Mai, channel vessel. And in that chapter, the various paragraphs describe the channel distribution, the channel theory that we learned in school, where meridians start and end. And before they get into all that, they tell us that Jingluo lie deep to muscle separations, and they're hidden between muscle separations deep and not visible. Okay, so most scholars interpret muscle separation as intermuscular or intramuscular septums. There are papers that have been published from Helene Langeman's group that associate those septums to myofascial connective chains. So there are a whole group of acupuncturists and thinkers, scholars out there that subscribe to the notion that the meridians are these myofascial chains. But let's go back to the classic what it says. It says that the jingmai is deep to the myofascial chains. You cannot be the myofascial chain and deep to the myofascial chain at all at the same time. You're either one or the other. So this is why, in my humble opinion, I don't think primary meridians are myofascial chains. I do think channel sinews could be myofascial chains along the lines of what Thomas Myers has done. So what do we know about the anatomy that are structures that are like deep to intramuscular septums? And those structures are neurovascular bundles. That's the way, and also lymphatic system too. Our body, it's like the design of a city. You lay down your plumbing and electricity side by side, because otherwise a lot of work to dig everything, and there's only so much finite space inside the body. So these vessels and nerves get lumped together because it's the most efficient way to convey information or distribute nutrients to different parts of the body. And so based on that understanding of anatomy, I am more in favor of the notion that that channels, meridians, and I want to just remind everybody that when we say, I know some people don't like the word meridian, so they like the word channel better. So, but whichever word you prefer, it is always used together as a binom, meaning Jing and Mai or Jing and Ruo together. Okay, so I like to think of that as a neurovascular bundle, neuro and vascular together at the same time, and that could possibly satisfy the description from Ling Su chapter 10 that Jingmais or neurovascular bundle are like deep to muscle separation or like deep to intramuscular septums. Now, do they perfectly match the description of the channel theory perfectly match what we now know about the pathway of these neurovascular bundles? No, they don't perfectly match. They match in a lot of places. What has been very interesting for me is that when we learn about Luo points, how Luo points are supposed to connect interior and exterior relationships or connect interior channels, what has been very, very rewarding in my research is that I have found that there are indeed nerve branches that satisfy that. So at every Luo point, it really does, let's say for lung 7, for example, does really cross into the large intestine territory, going from the yin to the yang. With the liver fiber we talked about earlier, does really go from the medial side. There's a saphenous branch of the leg. Going back to spleen line we talked about, that gives you that zing. The saphenous has a lot of little branches. There's a branch called the inferior anterior branch. It really crosses over from the medial side of the shin to the lateral side. So you can conceptualize that as going from the liver to the gallbladder. Every single one of the 12 Luo points really has a nerve that does that. For me, that was, just my mind blowing. My mind was blown.
Yeah, it's mind blowing.
I was like, wow,
train is off the tracks.
It is now. Actually, it's like the Speed movie. It's now fully. The brake is busted. It cannot be stopped. Okay, it's just going charging down. So for me to, wow, the ancient acupuncturists really knew their anatomy. I have a very metaphysical side. I practice astrology. I practice feng shui, which is, probably not the most scientific thing there is. But so I was totally comfortable with practicing acupuncture in a non-scientific kind of way. But once I amassed and realized what was happening from this research, I am left with no choice but to embrace the fact that it really is anatomical. It's not that I have like a bias or preference for Western medicine. It's just the evidence is on the table like that. And so, just seeing is believing, I guess. And now that has informed the way I look at the body and informed the way I use my needles to affect the body. And and even down to how I think about what the Dutch sensation is supposed to be when I'm trying to interact at that point.
I'm not sure that more metaphysical and this very deep material perspective that you're working with are mutually exclusive. It sounds to me like that there are ways that they mutually inform each other.
Certainly. I think our finite, human experience on this planet hasn't really quite reached that level. It's just a matter of time. Somebody brilliant or with more generations they'll actually find that. And we've seen this all the time, right? Like now Western science realizing that meditation practices changes the brain, like expressing gratitude actually makes you more happy. Like these things that Eastern traditions really, it's not like, hocus pocus, right? It's actually really substantial change to the body. So I totally agree. It's just a matter of time before we come in full circle, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to sit down and talk about this. And I just love it that an herb geek turns into, a deep acupuncture
That's
geek.
right.
That's, I like what you said earlier about how you never know how your life is actually going to go. You start off in one direction and you follow it with all your heart. And then other things open up. It's not that what you did before was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we travel these paths and they take us to completely unexpected places that we just cannot see from the beginning of starting off on any kind of a journey.
That's right. You just got to go with the flow, right? Stay true to the medicine.
Yeah. So if people would like to know more about what you're doing or attend one of your classes or somehow be able to get into their minds and practice this ability to look at the ancient stuff that we learned in school and the modern neurophysiology so that we can understand it better from both sides, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, the best way is actually to study with me in person, because I do upgrade and incorporate newest research and inform my own clinical experience. So that would be the best ways to study with me in person. And if you want to find out information about what my teaching schedule is, you can go to my website, which is www.neuro-meridian.net, and I list my teaching schedule there. I also, for those that are active on social media, I have a Facebook page called Neuro Meridian Acupuncture, and I also post events there. If you are unable to travel, then there's an option to study online with me. I am one of the presenters for healthy seminars. You can find some of my courses there. Otherwise, I do appear in different symposium and conference here and there. And so you can catch a little workshop with me if you're not quite ready to kind of dive headfirst into days and days of neuroanatomy. We're just going to check it out and fill out the waters.
You're not quite ready for the red pill yet.
Yes, you want a red pill or the blue pills, right? Yeah.
Great. Well, Poney, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a blast.
It's a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Michael.
Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Neurological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Neurological.